A stone circle in the Sahara Desert predates the Great Pyramid by over 1,000 years. This is the world of pre-dynastic Egypt, a time shrouded in mystery where colossal structures rose long before the first pharaohs. By the end of this exploration, you will see the origins of ancient Egypt in a completely new light. We will uncover how sophisticated societies built massive monuments without a centralized state, and why a site like Nabta Playa, a complex celestial calendar, forces us to rewrite our understanding of early human ingenuity. What does it truly take for a civilization to leave its mark on the world? That sense of awe, standing before stones placed by hands thousands of years gone, is the soul of monumental architecture. It is far more than just size. True monumentality is a statement, a physical declaration that a community possessed the vision to conceive a project spanning generations, the social unity to organize the labor, and the technical skill to execute a plan that would outlive them all. We often picture the step pyramid of Djoser as the start of Egypt's grand building tradition, yet that iconic structure represents not a beginning, but a culmination. It is the refined product of a much older, more experimental era of architectural ambition. The drive to build big, to leave a permanent mark on the world, was already alive and well in the pre-dynastic period. This foundational leap required more than just strong backs. It demanded a shared belief system powerful enough to motivate the work, a sophisticated understanding of logistics to feed and direct the builders, and a collective memory to pass the blueprint down through time. Understanding this deeper meaning of monumentality is our key to unlocking the secrets of a world that dared to build colossal structures long before the first pharaoh ever wore a crown. This immense timeline, a span of 3,000 years before the first dynasty, is the canvas on which our story unfolds. Think of it not as a dark and empty waiting room for history, but as a vast, humming workshop of innovation. This is the pre-dynastic period, stretching from around 6,000 BCE to 3,000 BCE. It was a slow-burning fuse of social and technological ferment that would eventually ignite the dynamite of the dynastic era. We can chart this incredible journey through distinct cultural phases, each adding a crucial piece to the puzzle. It begins with the Badarian culture, where we see the earliest evidence of permanent settlements in Upper Egypt, along with sophisticated craftsmanship in pottery and stone tools. Then comes the Naqada sequence, a series of 3 phases that trace a remarkable arc of development. Naqada 1 reveals more complex social structures and expanded trade. Naqada 2 shows the rise of powerful regional centers with clear signs of social hierarchy, and Naqada 3, the final centuries before unification, is a period of intense rivalry and consolidation, where the very idea of kingship was being forged. This was a vibrant, restless time. It was in these millennia that the essential seeds of pharaonic culture were sown, from religious beliefs and artistic styles to the social organization needed for grand projects. To grasp the true significance of a place like Nabta Playa, we must first appreciate this long and fertile ground from which it grew. But to build a legacy in stone, you first need a world that can support the dream. The stage for this early drama was not the barren Sahara we recognize from maps today, but a lush, green savanna. For millennia, this was a land of seasonal rains, scattered lakes, and winding rivers, a vibrant ecosystem teeming with life. Vast herds of animals grazed on grasslands that stretched to the horizon, and human communities flourished along the shores of immense, now vanished mega lakes. This was the Green Sahara, a paradise that made large, settled groups possible. Then the world began to change. Around 5000 BCE, a profound climatic shift started to take hold. The rains became less reliable, the lakes slowly receded, and the desert began to reclaim its dominion. This was not a sudden catastrophe, but a slow, inexorable squeeze that unfolded over generations. How does a society respond when its very world is slowly drying up? This environmental pressure became a powerful catalyst. It forced communities to adapt, to innovate, and perhaps most importantly, to come together in new ways. The need to manage scarce water sources, to defend prime grazing land, or to coordinate seasonal movements would have demanded unprecedented levels of social cooperation. In this context, the environment transforms from a mere backdrop into an active character in our story. It presented both a profound challenge and a unique opportunity. The very act of coming together to build something permanent, like a celestial calendar or a community gathering place, may have been a strategic response to a changing climate. It was a way to solidify social bonds, to create a fixed point in a shifting world, and to leave a mark that said, "We were here, we endured, and we understood the rhythms of our universe." This interplay between a generous world that allowed populations to grow and a challenging one that forced them to organize is the crucible in which the first monumental ambitions were forged. It was in this drying world that a group of nomadic cattle herders chose to make a statement that would echo for millennia. In the 1970s, an archaeological team led by Fred Wendorf stumbled upon something extraordinary emerging from the sands of the Egyptian Sahara. They called the site Nabta Playa. What they uncovered was not a city or a temple in the traditional sense, but something arguably more profound, a complex and precisely arranged collection of massive stones. At its heart was a stone circle, now known as the world's oldest known astronomical observatory. Wendorf himself would later state that these were the oldest known astronomical alignments in the world, a calendar in stone built around 4500 BCE. This was not a random pile of rocks, it was a deliberate, sophisticated arrangement. A central slab was flanked by others that aligned with the rising sun of the summer solstice, while additional stones marked other key celestial events. This was a cosmic clock, a permanent record of the heavens etched into the desert floor. The implications are staggering. Here, a society we might label as simple nomadic herders demonstrated a capacity for abstract thought and long-term planning that rivals any ancient civilization. They possessed a deep, working knowledge of the solar year, understanding the cyclical nature of the seasons with a precision that would not be seen again in Egypt for over 1,000 years. This was not just about telling time, it was about survival, about knowing when the rains might come, when to move their herds, and when to gather for communal ceremonies. The construction itself required a coordinated effort, a shared vision that brought people together to move and place these multi-ton megaliths. The precision of Nabta Playa reveals a level of intellectual achievement we are only beginning to comprehend. It stands as a silent, powerful challenge to our linear view of progress, proving that the drive to understand the cosmos and to build in harmony with it is a human impulse far older than we ever knew. These towering stone slabs, some weighing several tons, were not local. They were a deliberate choice, transported over miles of rugged terrain from distant quarries. This was not a simple task. It was a monumental undertaking that required coordinated labor and a shared, unwavering purpose. The centerpiece of this sacred landscape was a massive central slab, carefully positioned and flanked by other megaliths. Many researchers suggest this central stone may have represented a powerful deity or a cosmic focal point, an anchor for the entire celestial arrangement. Surrounding it, other stones were set with astonishing precision, their alignments pointing directly to key stars like Sirius and the Belt of Orion. This was a permanent map of the heavens, a way to track the passage of time and the changing seasons with unerring accuracy. But the complexity does not end above ground. Beneath the sand, archaeologists found an elaborate underground complex, a series of chambers that may have served as ritual spaces or repositories for ceremonial objects. One of the most telling discoveries was the so-called Cowstone. This particular megalith features a clear, carved figure of a bovine, a powerful symbol that connects the entire site to early cattle cults. For these pastoral people, cattle were far more than just a source of food. They represented wealth, status, and possibly a deep spiritual significance, a bridge between the human world and the divine. The placement of this symbol on a permanent stone monument tells us that their beliefs were becoming formalized, etched into the very fabric of their world. This was not random rock placement. It was a carefully designed sacred landscape, a three-dimensional testament to a society that saw no separation between the spiritual and the scientific. Their understanding of the stars was woven into their reverence for the natural world, all expressed through the immense, enduring language of stone. So what kind of society could have orchestrated such a precise and demanding project? The stones of Nabta Playa speak of a community far more complex than simple bands of wandering herders. Moving multi-ton slabs across the desert was not a task for a handful of farmers. This endeavor required the minds of architects who understood engineering, the knowledge of astronomers who could read the night sky, and the authority of leaders who could coordinate the labor of many people over a significant period. This suggests a society with specialized roles, a clear division of labor where not every individual was solely focused on day-to-day survival. The most compelling theory is that Nabta Playa functioned as a regional ceremonial center, a fixed and sacred point in the vast, open landscape. For nomadic pastoralists whose lives were defined by seasonal movement, this calendar in stone became an anchor. It was a place where scattered groups would converge at specific times of the year, guided by the celestial alignments they all understood. They would meet here to conduct rituals, settle disputes, arrange marriages, and trade goods. This regular, organized gathering would have forged a powerful shared identity among people who otherwise lived apart. The very existence of this center implies a level of social organization we rarely associate with this era. It hints at emerging hierarchies, perhaps where elders or spiritual leaders held the knowledge of the stars and the authority to direct communal projects. This is the true societal implication of Nabta Playa. It forces us to reconsider the pre-dynastic world as one capable of sophisticated collaboration, where the seeds of leadership and social structure were already taking root in the desert sands, long before the concept of a pharaoh ever existed. While the herders of Nabta Playa were mapping the stars, a profound transformation was unfolding hundreds of miles to the east, along the fertile banks of the Nile River. Here, the Naqada culture was laying the very foundations of Egypt itself. This was not a slow, quiet evolution, but a vibrant explosion of social complexity. The catalyst for this change was the emergence of the first true towns, places like Naqada and Hierakonpolis. Think of these settlements not as simple, sprawling villages, but as the incubators of a civilization. For the first time, large populations were living in close proximity, and this new density became a powerful engine for change. When many people live together, ideas collide and competition flourishes. Specialists emerge who no longer farm, but instead dedicate their lives to perfecting a single craft. The archaeological record from these towns is bursting with evidence of this new world. We find workshops for bead making where artisans crafted exquisite jewelry from materials like carnelian and gold. We see pottery of such high quality and distinctive style that it becomes a marker of cultural identity, traded up and down the river. This is not just craft, it is craft specialization, a clear sign that society was dividing into different roles and statuses. The most telling evidence, however, comes from the resting places of these early Egyptians. The cemeteries at Naqada and Hierakonpolis reveal a story of growing social stratification. While most graves were simple pits, a select few were larger, lined with mudbrick and filled with valuable goods, ceremonial weapons, and ornate pallets for grinding cosmetics. A handful of individuals were being set apart in death, suggesting they held significant power or wealth in life. This was the birth of an elite class. Furthermore, goods found in these tombs tell a story that stretches far beyond the Nile Valley. Lapis lazuli from distant Afghanistan, cedar wood from the Levant, and other exotic materials prove that these proto-urban centers were nodes in a vast, long-distance trade network. They were not isolated outposts but connected communities actively engaging with the wider world. This concentration of people, resources, and ambition created a pressure cooker for innovation. The organizational skills needed to manage trade, to direct specialized craftspeople, and to orchestrate the construction of elaborate tombs for the elite were the very same skills required for monumental architecture. The society was learning how to plan, how to command labor, and how to execute a shared vision on a scale never before attempted. These towns were the training grounds, the proving fields where the collective capacity for large-scale construction was being forged in the fires of competition and social complexity. The architectural leaps of the dynastic era were not a sudden miracle. They were the inevitable outcome of a process that began here, in these bustling, ambitious incubators on the Nile. The ambition to build was not confined to celestial calendars or elaborate tombs. Along the fertile banks of the Nile, another kind of structure began to rise from the soil, one that spoke of a changing social landscape. At key settlements like Hierakonpolis and Abydos, archaeologists have uncovered the remains of massive mudbrick fortifications. Dating back to the Naqada I and II periods, these were not simple fences. They were formidable barriers featuring thick walls reinforced with projecting bastions, strategically placed to control access and provide overlapping fields of defense. Their very presence tells a story of a time when communities felt a new need to protect what was theirs. The question is, protection from what? The straightforward answer points to a period of increased competition, perhaps even conflict, as growing towns vied for control of precious land and trade routes. But these walls may have served a deeper, more symbolic purpose. Think of them not just as defensive lines, but as powerful proclamations. For an emerging elite class, a massive wall was a permanent, visible symbol of their authority and their ability to command the labor required to build it. It physically separated those inside, the protected and the powerful, from those outside. This was an early form of monumental public works, a project that required the coordinated effort of an entire community, all directed toward a single goal. The organizational skill needed to plan, manufacture thousands of mudbricks, and construct these formidable defenses was a crucial rehearsal for even greater projects. It signaled a centralization of authority, a society learning to follow a unified plan for what it perceived as the common good. This shift, from building for the cosmos to building for collective security and social control, was a fundamental step. The ability to marshal labor for a fortress wall was the very same ability that would one day be used to raise a pyramid. The walls of Hierakonpolis did more than just defend a town, they enclosed a revolution. Within their perimeter, archaeologists uncovered something far grander than a simple chieftain's hut. They found an elite precinct, a sprawling complex centered around a massive mudbrick structure with a remarkable feature, a niched facade. This was not just a building, it was a statement. The walls were not flat, but intricately patterned with a series of recessed panels, creating a play of light and shadow that would have been strikingly sophisticated for its time. This architectural style would later become the hallmark of royal palaces and the exteriors of dynastic tombs. Here, in this pre-dynastic town, we are likely looking at one of the earliest palaces or a major ceremonial center in all of Egypt. This was the seat of power for a local ruler whose influence was expressed not just through words, but through the very architecture that dominated the skyline. The scale of this building alone speaks of an individual or a family who could command the labor and resources of the entire community. But the story of this precinct is told not only by its central palace. Surrounding it was a hive of specialized industry. Researchers found evidence of large-scale breweries, rows of pottery kilns firing distinctive vessels, and workshops dedicated to crafting fine stone tools and ornaments. This was centralized production on a scale never seen before. It means that the ruler of Hierakonpolis was not only a political leader but also an economic one, controlling the production of goods that were essential for daily life, for trade, and for ceremonial feasts. The beer brewed here was not merely a beverage, it was a social glue, likely distributed during communal gatherings to reinforce loyalty and status. The pots fired in these kilns carried the cultural signature of this powerful center far and wide. This entire complex, with its palatial architecture and its industrial heart, reveals a society that had crossed a critical threshold. Power was no longer just about personal charisma or battlefield success. It was becoming institutionalized, embedded in a built environment designed to project authority and manage an economy. The concept of a monumental seat of power, a place from which a community was governed and its resources were directed, was being born right here, centuries before the first pharaoh unified the land. This drive to build and project power found its ultimate expression not in the palaces of the living, but in the houses of the dead. Along the desert's edge at places like Sahara and Abydos, the simple pit graves of earlier times began to transform into something far more imposing. These were the first mastabas, massive rectangular structures built from mudbrick, with flat roofs and sloping sides that rose from the sand like permanent benches. Their design was deliberate and profound. While a palace was for a lifetime, a mastaba was built for eternity, a permanent home for the spirit in the world to come. This architectural leap marks a critical turning point in human thought, where the concept of an afterlife became something you could physically build for, a destiny so important it demanded a monumental investment. The most stunning example of this new ideology is Tomb Uj at Abydos. Discovered in the late 1980s, this is not a simple burial chamber. It is a sprawling underground complex, a labyrinth of 12 rooms carved deep into the desert floor. The scale alone is breathtaking, but it is the contents that truly tell the story of a society transformed. Within those chambers, archaeologists found more than 400 large ceramic jars, many still containing residue of wine. This was not a modest offering for a journey into the next life. This was a king's ransom, a stockpile of luxury goods that represented immense wealth and far-reaching trade connections. The tomb also held early examples of inscribed labels, tiny bone and ivory tags that may have denoted the origin of the wine or the contents of other offerings. Some researchers see these as some of the earliest precursors to hieroglyphic writing, suggesting that the need to manage and legitimize this vast funerary wealth may have been a catalyst for the development of the written word itself. Tomb Uj was a declaration in brick and wine. It announced that a person of such immense power and status had emerged, that their death was not an end, but a transition that required a permanent, fortified palace for the soul. The resources poured into this single resting place, the labor to dig its chambers, the bricks to line its walls, and the treasure to fill its rooms, represent a level of concentrated authority that was unimaginable just centuries before. This shift from a simple burial to a monumental tomb is one of the most significant leaps in pre-dynastic history. It reflects a society that had fully embraced social hierarchy, with a ruler at the top who commanded not just the loyalty of the people, but also their labor and their produce for a project that served him alone in the afterlife. The Mastaba was the direct architectural ancestor of the pyramid, a stepping stone in both design and ideology. In these sprawling, resource-heavy tombs, we see the final rehearsal for the ultimate act of monumentality, a rehearsal that would soon culminate in the rise of the first god-kings and the dawn of the dynastic age. These stones and tombs were never just stone and brick. They were a language, a physical dialogue between a people and the universe they sought to understand. At Nabta Playa, the alignment with stars like Sirius was far more than a practical calendar. For those herders, the cosmos was a living, breathing entity. By mirroring the heavens on the earth, they were forging a sacred connection, anchoring their community and their rituals to the eternal, predictable rhythms of the sky. This was an act of profound integration, a way of saying that their lives, their herds, and their movements were part of a grand celestial order. The very permanence of the stone circle was a rebellion against the transience of their nomadic existence, a fixed point of meaning in a world of constant change. This same drive to connect with the divine is etched into the very form of the Mastaba tombs. Their flat, massive roofs were not an end but a beginning. They were conceived as a platform, a literal stairway for the soul of the powerful individual buried within to ascend and join the circumpolar stars, the so-called imperishable ones that never set below the horizon. In this powerful symbolism, death was not an exit but a promotion, a journey to a celestial court where the elite would take their place among the eternal lights. The choice of materials itself was deeply symbolic. The multi-ton slabs at Nabta, hauled from distant quarries, spoke of a communal effort that itself became a ritual, a physical testament to shared belief. For the Mastabas, the use of millions of sun-dried mudbricks was not merely practical. It was a deliberate act of creation, of transforming the very earth of Egypt into a vessel for eternity. Even the orientation of these structures was charged with meaning. A tomb aligned to the North Star was not just positioned correctly, it was plugged into the cosmic machinery, ensuring the deceased's successful transition. This intricate web of symbolism reveals the true engine behind these colossal projects. It was not brute force but belief, the investment of thousands of hours of labor, the marshalling of resources, the precise execution of a plan spanning generations. All of this was fueled by a shared ideology that linked power, religion, and cosmic order into one inseparable whole. The ruler who commanded the building of a mastaba was not just a political leader, he was the central pillar of this cosmic system, and his monumental tomb was the guarantee that the order he represented would endure forever. This was the ideological bedrock upon which the pharaohs would later stand, presenting themselves as the living embodiment of this same unbreakable connection between the earth and the stars. The shaman stands within the stone circle, his face tilted toward the pre-dawn sky. As the first sliver of solstice sun breaks the horizon, aligning perfectly with the central slab, he turns to the gathered community. He interprets the celestial sign, linking the stars' return to the coming rains and the necessary movement of the herds. In this moment, we see the true engine of monumentality, a belief system so powerful it could move not just hearts but multi-ton stones. Religion and ritual were likely the primary catalysts for these first colossal projects. They provided the essential framework that united scattered groups, transforming a collection of families into a community with a shared purpose. The very act of building was a profound ritual in itself. Hauling a megalith across the desert was not mere labor, it was a physical prayer, a collective act of faith that bound every participant to the project and to each other. This shared work forged a powerful cultural identity, a sense of us that was literally set in stone. The knowledge held by the shaman or priest, the ability to read the heavens and predict the seasons, also served to legitimize a new kind of leader. This was not brute force authority, but authority granted by perceived access to the divine. The community followed because they believed these individuals could intercede with the forces that controlled their survival. The calendar at Nabta Playa was both a practical tool and a sacred text, and its construction cemented the role of a spiritual elite who could interpret its meaning. This dynamic, where belief motivates labor and leadership is sanctified by ritual, created a self-reinforcing cycle. A successful ritual at the calendar reinforced the leader's authority, which enabled the organization of even more ambitious projects, which further solidified the shared identity and beliefs of the people. The stones were not the goal, they were the magnificent byproduct of a society answering a deep, human need to find order in the cosmos and to see their own place reflected within it. This technological leap from the temporary to the eternal began with the humblest of materials. Before there were stones aligned with stars, communities built with what was immediately at hand. Along the lush banks of the Nile, they wove reeds and bundled papyrus into sturdy huts and fences, structures that were practical but fleeting, lasting only a season or two before decay set in. The true architectural revolution, the one that would unlock the potential for everything that followed, was born from the earth beneath their feet. It was the invention of the sun-dried mudbrick. The process itself was a form of alchemy, transforming mud, water, and straw into durable building blocks. Workers would mix Nile silt with chopped straw, which acted as a binding agent to prevent cracking, and press the thick mud into wooden molds. These rectangular forms were then tipped out onto the ground to bake hard under the intense Egyptian sun. It was a simple, almost elemental technology, but its impact was profound. For the first time, communities possessed a building material that was both massively scalable and virtually permanent. A family could build a home that would last for generations, and a leader could envision a palace or a tomb that would stand for eternity. This was the democratization of permanence, and it fundamentally changed how people related to their built world. But mudbrick alone was not enough for the grandest visions. To support these larger, heavier walls, builders began to incorporate stone foundations. They learned to set the first courses of a building on a footing of rough limestone blocks, protecting the vulnerable mudbrick from groundwater and erosion. This hybrid approach combined the easy workability of brick with the timeless strength of stone. Perhaps even more critical was the development of the tools needed to impose order on this new scale. How do you ensure that the long walls of a massive mastaba tomb are perfectly straight and its corners form perfect right angles? The answer lay in a simple but brilliant toolkit. Builders used stretched cords covered in red pigment. By snapping these cords against a prepared surface, they could create perfectly straight guidelines. To check for true right angles, they used what we would recognize as the world's first carpenter's squares, and they mastered the use of the plumb bob, a weighted string that could verify a wall's perfect vertical alignment. These were the humble instruments of precision that translated an abstract architectural plan into a physical reality. The journey from a woven reed hut to a geometrically perfect mudbrick mastaba represents one of humanity's quietest yet most consequential revolutions. It was an investment not just in materials, but in a body of practical knowledge, a shared skill set that could be passed down and refined. This was the essential technological groundwork, the mastery of materials and measurement that made the dream of monumentality not just a wish, but an achievable plan. How were these vast projects, these calendars of stone and tombs for eternity, actually built without a pharaoh to command them? The answer lies not in a single blueprint, but in the complex social machinery of a community united by a shared vision. Think of the effort required at Nabta Playa. Moving a single multi-ton slab from a distant quarry was a task far beyond one family. It demanded the coordinated strength of dozens, perhaps even hundreds, of people working in unison. Researchers suggest this labor was likely organized through the deep-rooted networks of kinship and clan. In a world where family ties defined your place in society, a project blessed by elders and spiritual leaders would have been seen not as forced work, but as a sacred obligation, a religious duty that benefited the entire community. This was not a tax paid to a king, but an investment in cosmic order and communal survival. The emerging elites, those individuals with the knowledge of the stars or a claim to special status, did not command with a whip but with persuasion. Their authority was rooted in their perceived ability to intercede with the forces of nature. They were the project managers of belief, the ones who could articulate the vision of a permanent celestial clock and inspire the people to make it real. This ability to mobilize, feed, and direct a large workforce is, in itself, one of the most monumental achievements of the pre-dynastic era. It required foresight to gather and store surplus food to feed the builders. It required social skill to resolve disputes and maintain morale over weeks or months of difficult labor. And it required a collective memory, a way to pass the plan from one generation to the next, ensuring the project was completed even if its original architects did not live to see it finished. This capacity for sustained collective action is a clear fingerprint of complex social organization. It represents a society learning to pool its resources and channel its energy toward a single, transcendent goal. The workforce that raised the stones of Nabta Playa or the mudbrick mastabas at Abydos was a living prototype. They were rehearsing the very same principles of labor organization, of resource management, and of centralized direction that would one day be wielded by the state to build the Great Pyramid. The true foundation of Egypt's monumental age was not laid in stone, but in the social contract of a community learning to build together. The ability to command labor was one thing, but to truly build for eternity, you needed resources that ordinary earth could not provide. The monumental ambitions of pre-dynastic societies reached far beyond the Nile Valley, tapping into trade routes that stretched across the known world. Imagine the journey of a single cedar log felled in the snowy mountains of Lebanon. It would be hauled to the coast, loaded onto a ship, and sailed across the Mediterranean, then transferred to barges for the slow journey up the Nile. This was not a simple exchange of goods, it was a monumental feat of logistics and diplomacy in itself. The presence of Lebanese cedar in pre-dynastic tombs, along with vibrant turquoise mined from the distant sands of the Sinai Peninsula, and exotic stones like gneiss and brexia from the eastern desert, tells a story of profound connection. These were not local products. Their acquisition required something new, a web of relationships with distant cultures, negotiated by envoys who represented emerging centers of power. The leaders who commissioned these massive building projects were not just local chieftains, they were players in an international network. Possessing such rare materials was a powerful form of display. A tomb lined with fragrant cedar or adorned with brilliant blue turquoise was a clear, undeniable statement. It proclaimed that its occupant had the wealth to acquire the impossible and the influence to command the loyalty of traders and diplomats. This access to diversity was a key enabler of architectural ambition. Mudbrick could build a large tomb, but it was the imported cedar for the roof beams, the polished exotic stone for a ceremonial palette, and the shimmering turquoise inlays that transformed it from a large building into a statement of supreme, far-reaching authority. The very act of gathering these materials from the corners of the world was a demonstration of power as impressive as the construction itself. It proved that the vision of these early elites was not confined by the horizon, and their influence reached as far as their trading partners could travel. The scattered pieces of a civilization were now ready to be forged into a single blade. The Naqada III period, the final centuries before the dawn of the dynastic age, was a time of fire and ambition. This was not a peaceful transition. The archaeological record speaks of fortified towns, of cemeteries where some individuals were laid to rest with weapons of war, and of artistic motifs depicting bound captives and triumphant rulers. The once distinct regions of Egypt, each with its own architectural traditions and cultural practices, were being drawn into a vortex of competition and conflict. Out of this crucible of rivalry, a new force emerged, one that would use the language of stone and brick not just to proclaim local power, but to unify an entire land. The architectural styles that had developed in isolation now began a profound conversation. From the powerful southern centers like Hierakonpolis came the tradition of the niched facade, that striking paneled design that adorned the walls of elite precincts. It was an architecture of bold, visual statement. From the northern delta regions came different burial customs and perhaps a distinct approach to urban planning. As political and economic ties tightened, these regional dialects of design began to merge. The result was a new, hybrid architectural language, a visual synthesis that deliberately borrowed from both North and South. This was a genius act of political theater. By creating buildings and monuments that incorporated the sacred forms of both regions, the emerging state was crafting a pan-Egyptian identity. It was a way of telling everyone from the first cataract to the Mediterranean Sea that they were now part of a single, cohesive whole. A tomb built in this new, composite style was no longer just a southern tomb or a northern tomb. It was an Egyptian tomb. The very landscape was being remade into a tool of unification, a constant, visible reminder of a new, collective destiny. This shared architectural vocabulary became the direct inheritance of the First Dynasty, a ready-made toolkit of symbolic forms that the first pharaohs would use to express their authority over a unified kingdom. The drive to build monumentally, once a tool for local elites to assert their power, was now being harnessed for the ultimate project, the creation of Egypt itself. At Abydos, the desert itself was reshaped to proclaim a new kind of power. Rising from the sands are the colossal ruins known as the royal enclosures, vast rectangular complexes surrounded by massive mudbrick walls. The enclosure, attributed to King Khosekemwy, one of the last rulers of the pre-dynastic era, is a breathtaking sight even in its ruined state. Its walls, which originally stood many meters high, were not plain barriers. They were built in the distinctive palace facade style, a rhythmic pattern of recessed niches and projecting buttresses that created a play of light and shadow across an immense scale. This was not a tomb for the king's body, but a fortress for his spirit. These enclosures were likely the ceremonial heart of the king's mortuary cult, a place where rituals and offerings would be performed to sustain his legacy for eternity. The sheer size of these complexes is almost incomprehensible. They cover an area larger than many modern city blocks, requiring millions of sun-dried bricks and an army of laborers working for years. This represents the culmination of everything that came before, the final, decisive step from community project to state-directed enterprise. The resources of an entire region were now being funneled into a single, monumental expression of one individual's authority. The architectural DNA of these enclosures is unmistakable. They contained all the essential elements that would later define the pyramid complex of the pharaohs: a vast walled courtyard, a symbolic palace for the afterlife, and a focus on the perpetual cult of the ruler. In many ways, these sprawling mudbrick complexes are the true blueprints for the step pyramid that would follow. They represent the final rehearsal, the moment when the scale of ambition and the concentration of power reached a critical mass. What we witness at Abydos is the final piece of the puzzle snapping into place. The ability to command labor, the ideology of divine kingship, and the architectural expertise all converged and became permanently fused under the direction of a single proto-pharaonic ruler. The age of the pharaohs did not begin with a whisper, but with the thunderous collapse of millions of bricks being molded and set into a wall that was meant to last forever. This drive to build forever found its ultimate expression in a profound spiritual concept, the mansion of millions of years. This was the ancient Egyptian name for the mortuary temple complex, a place designed not just as a tomb but as an eternal engine for the king's spirit. Its purpose was to sustain his legacy through perpetual rituals and offerings, ensuring his presence and favor for the nation across countless generations. This was not merely a building, it was a divine machine crafted from stone, a permanent home for a power that transcended a single human lifetime. The ideological seeds for this magnificent concept were sown long before, in the very pre-dynastic enclosures and mastabas we have explored. The sprawling ceremonial complex of a ruler like Khosekemwy at Abydos was in essence a prototype mansion of millions of years. Its massive walls enclosed a sacred space dedicated to the ongoing cult of the leader, a place where the community would return to reaffirm his enduring authority. The simple desire for a remembered resting place had evolved into an ambitious plan for an eternal, active institution. This reveals the powerful psychological and religious force that truly fueled these architectural leaps. It was the deep-seated human need to defy time, to create something so permanent that it would forever anchor a legacy in the world. This burning desire to build forever is what turned practical engineering into transcendent art. It motivated the refinement of techniques, the quest for more durable materials, and the relentless push for a grander scale. Every mastaba roof, conceived as a stairway to the stars, was a declaration of this belief. Every aligned stone at Nabta Playa was an attempt to tether human life to the eternal cycles of the cosmos. This enduring philosophical link connects the earliest experiments in the desert directly to the sun-washed limestone of the Giza Plateau. The Great Pyramid is the ultimate mansion of millions of years, the final, flawless incarnation of an idea that began with a circle of stones and a mudbrick bench in the sand. It stands as the magnificent fulfillment of a dream first dreamed by cattle herders and town builders, a dream of permanence that would shape the very soul of a civilization for ages to come. These discoveries in the desert and along the Nile have fundamentally rewritten the opening chapter of Egyptian history. For a very long time, the prevailing view was that Egyptian civilization appeared almost fully formed with the First Dynasty, a miraculous birth of statehood and monumental construction. The Great Pyramids of Giza were seen as a sudden, inexplicable leap, as if a brilliant culture had sprung from the sands overnight. The evidence we have been exploring, from Nabta Playa to the royal enclosures at Abydos, shatters that simplistic narrative. It reveals a long, intricate prelude of social and technological experimentation. Archaeologist Michael Hoffman powerfully articulated this new understanding, insisting that the roots of pharaonic culture were not shallow, but were instead deep and complex, woven through thousands of years of pre-dynastic development. He saw the first dynasty not as a beginning but as a brilliant culmination. This is a profound paradigm shift in how we view the birth of civilizations. It demonstrates that civilization itself is not a single event, like a light switching on, but a slow, intricate process. It is a tapestry woven from countless threads, from the first astronomical observations of desert herders to the emerging social hierarchies in river towns. The iconic achievements of the pharaohs, the pyramids, the temples, the hieroglyphs, were not invented from nothing. They were built upon a foundation laid over millennia. They were the inheritance of a long legacy of trial and error, of belief systems solidified, and of organizational skills perfected. Recognizing this deep and rich prehistory does not diminish the glory of dynastic Egypt. On the contrary, it enriches it immensely. It transforms the story from a mysterious miracle into a relatable human journey, a testament to the enduring power of communities to innovate, collaborate, and gradually build a world that would endure for ages. The stones of Nabta Playa were not a solitary phenomenon echoing in an empty world. While cattle herders in the Sahara were aligning megaliths with the stars, another profound mystery was unfolding 700 miles to the northeast, on a barren hilltop in modern-day Turkey. Here, at a site called Göbekli Tepe, hunter-gatherers were accomplishing something equally staggering. Thousands of years before the Great Pyramid, they were quarrying, carving, and erecting immense limestone pillars, some weighing over 10 tons, arranging them into vast circular enclosures. These were not dwellings or storage pits. They were the world's oldest known temple complexes, built by a society that had not yet even invented pottery or settled into farming. The parallel is both startling and illuminating. On one hand, you have the pastoralists of Nabta Playa, their calendar rooted in the cyclical movements of their herds and the heavens. On the other, the hunters of Göbekli Tepe, creating a monumental sacred landscape adorned with elaborate carvings of dangerous animals. They faced different environments, different ways of life, and yet they both arrived at the same profound conclusion: the need to express their worldview through colossal stone architecture. This pattern of independent invention repeats itself across the ancient world. Far to the west, on the Mediterranean islands of Malta, another culture was raising massive megalithic temples around 3600 BCE. These structures, with their complex plans and intricate stonework, represent one of the earliest examples of true freestanding architecture in the world, all created without metal tools. What does this global chorus tell us? It suggests that the drive to build monumentally is a deep-seated human impulse, one that emerges again and again when certain conditions are met. It is not a cultural virus that spreads from a single point of origin. Instead, it is a solution that different societies discover independently when faced with the challenges and opportunities of growing social complexity, a shared belief system, and the need to create a permanent anchor in a changing world. Egypt's pre-dynastic journey was not a unique, isolated miracle. It was a powerful and particularly influential variation on a theme that was being played out across the globe, a testament to a shared chapter in the human story where we first learned to translate our greatest ideas into the enduring language of stone. The world these early builders knew was slowly fading away. As the Sahara continued its relentless march toward hyper-aridity, the once green pastures around places like Nabta Playa could no longer sustain the communities that had gathered there. The seasonal lakes dried up, the grasslands retreated, and the very reason for the great stone calendar's existence was vanishing. This was not a sudden collapse, but a slow, generational retreat, a gradual migration toward the one constant in a changing world, the life-giving Nile River. So what became of their sophisticated knowledge, their traditions of building and stargazing when the desert finally reclaimed their sacred sites? The stones themselves fell silent, but the ideas they represented did not simply vanish into the sand. The most compelling theory is one of cultural absorption, a quiet merging of peoples and beliefs. As these pastoralists moved eastward and settled along the Nile, they brought their world with them, not in carts and bags, but in their minds and rituals. Their deep understanding of the solar cycle and the stars would have been invaluable knowledge for an agricultural society dependent on the Nile's flood. Their traditions of communal labor for monumental projects provided a ready-made blueprint for the emerging towns. This was not a conquest, but a cultural transfusion, where the innovations of the periphery were adopted and refined by the powerful centers of the Nile Valley. We can see this legacy etched into the very soul of dynastic Egypt. The Mastaba tomb, with its flat roof serving as a stairway to the circumpolar stars, is a direct architectural descendant of the celestial ideology practiced at Nabta Playa. The pharaoh's role as the unifier of the two lands finds a profound echo in the earlier, pan-tribal gatherings at the desert calendar, where scattered groups came together under a shared cosmic order. Even the iconic Egyptian headdress, the so-called white crown of Upper Egypt, may have its origins in the ceremonial regalia of these pre-dynastic desert chiefs. Their story is not one of a dead end or a failed civilization. It is a story of brilliant adaptation, where the hard-won knowledge of a desert people became the intellectual and spiritual inheritance of a river kingdom. The abandonment of their sites was not an ending but a strategic pivot, a dispersal of seeds that would find fertile ground along the Nile and blossom into one of history's most enduring cultures. The true monument of these early builders was not the circle of stones they left behind, but the invisible foundation they laid for everything that was to come. The silent traces of these lost societies are now whispering their secrets, thanks to the quiet revolution of modern archaeology. Gone are the days of relying solely on shovels and intuition. Today, scientists peer into the earth without ever breaking the surface, using tools that feel like they belong in science fiction. Satellite imagery, for instance, scans vast deserts from space, detecting subtle discolorations in the soil that are completely invisible to the human eye on the ground. These faint stains, known as crop marks, often reveal the ghostly outlines of ancient mudbrick walls or long filled in ditches. A patch of earth that looks entirely barren might, from space, show the clear, geometric shape of a forgotten settlement's foundation, a phantom city waiting to be recognized. This is how we are beginning to map the true extent of the pre-dynastic world, discovering entire communities that left no towering ruins behind, only these faint whispers in the earth. When a promising site is identified from above, the investigation continues with ground-penetrating radar. This technology sends radio waves deep into the soil, painting a detailed picture of what lies buried below. It can distinguish between solid stone, voids like burial chambers, and the disturbed earth of ancient postholes. Imagine seeing a detailed, three-dimensional map of an entire village layout, its houses, storage pits, and pathways, all revealed while the site remains perfectly intact. This non-invasive approach preserves these fragile sites for future generations, while granting us an unprecedented look into the daily lives of the people who built the first monuments. But the revelations do not stop with architecture. In the laboratory, isotopic analysis of bones and teeth acts like a dietary time machine. By studying the chemical signatures locked within ancient remains, scientists can determine what an individual ate and even where they sourced their water thousands of years ago. This tells us if a person grew up locally or had traveled from a distant region, revealing patterns of migration and trade that written records could never provide. These technological advances are fundamentally rewriting the story of early monumentality. They are filling in the blank spaces on our maps with vibrant detail, showing us that the landscape was far more densely populated and interconnected than we ever suspected. The narrative is no longer set in stone. It is a living, breathing document. With every new satellite pass and every new soil sample, we add another sentence, another chapter, to the epic story of how ordinary people first dared to build for eternity. Yet for all these discoveries, the world of pre-dynastic Egypt remains a landscape of vibrant debate. Scholars do not always see eye to eye on the fundamental nature of this emerging society. Were these early chiefdoms fundamentally peaceful, their monumental projects born of shared spiritual purpose? Or does the evidence of fortified walls and weapon-laden burials point to a more turbulent era, where rival centers clashed for control of land and trade? The truth likely lies somewhere in the complex middle, a tapestry woven with both cooperation and conflict. Another great question revolves around the moment of unification itself. Was the creation of Egypt a slow, organic process of cultural and economic blending, a gradual weaving together of regional identities over centuries? Or was it a swift, decisive conquest by a powerful southern ruler, a single military campaign that forged a kingdom in fire and blood? The archaeological record offers tantalizing clues for both interpretations, and the debate continues to evolve with each new excavation. And then there is the question of external influence. How much of Egypt's early spark was homegrown, and how much was kindled by ideas from beyond its borders? The presence of foreign materials proves contact, but did that contact bring new beliefs, new technologies, or new ways of organizing society? Or did the communities of the Nile Valley simply adapt these outside elements to serve their own unique and powerful cultural vision? These are not signs of a failed investigation, but rather the hallmark of a living, breathing field of science. These open questions are the engines of discovery. They drive archaeologists back into the field and into the laboratories, re-examining old evidence with new technologies and asking new questions of the silent stones. This dynamic, ever-shifting understanding is what makes the study of our deep past so profoundly exciting. It reminds us that history is not a closed book, but a story we are still actively writing, one fragment of pottery, one satellite image, and one brilliant interpretation at a time. That deep-seated urge to reshape the world on a colossal scale is a signature of our species. Why do we do it? What compels a community to pour generations of effort into a structure that will outlive every single person who first conceived it? The answers are woven into the very fabric of human psychology, and the pre-dynastic Egyptians offer us a powerful case study. One of the most fundamental drivers is the desire to impose order on a chaotic and unpredictable world. For the herders at Nabta Playa, the desert was vast and shifting. By creating a permanent stone calendar that mirrored the reliable cycles of the stars, they were building a fixed point of meaning. They were translating the terrifying randomness of nature into a predictable, understandable system. This act of cosmic ordering was a profound source of comfort and control. It was a way of saying, we may not command the rains, but we can comprehend their timing, and in that understanding we find our power. This impulse to create legacies is equally powerful. A simple grave marker says, "I was here." A Mastaba tomb says, "My name and my power will echo through time." The mansion of millions of years was the ultimate expression of this, a direct challenge to the oblivion of death. It is the human spirit rebelling against its own transience, screaming into the future, "I mattered." My life had meaning that will not be erased. This drive is not merely about ego, but about connecting oneself to the endless flow of history, ensuring a place in the story long after the individual voice has fallen silent. Then there is the undeniable role of power. A massive wall or a towering pyramid is a physical manifestation of authority. It demonstrates in an undeniable way that its builder could command the labor, the resources, and the loyalty of thousands. It is a silent, permanent assertion of control over both people and the landscape itself. Yet, perhaps the deepest layer is the yearning to commune with the divine. Monumental architecture often serves as a bridge between the earthly and the celestial. The pyramid was a ramp to the stars. The stone circle was a meeting place with the cosmos. These structures were not just for the living, but were conceived as portals, as permanent homes for the gods or for the human spirit to join them. In the end, these colossal projects connect us across the millennia. When we stand before the silent stones of Nabta Playa or the vast enclosures of Abydos, we are not just looking at ancient ruins, we are witnessing the external manifestation of an internal human landscape, a shared dream of order, meaning, and eternity. We recognize in their ambition a mirror of our own deepest desires, a universal impulse to build not just for shelter, but for the soul. So the story comes full circle, from a ring of stones in a drying savanna to the colossal walls of a proto-pharaonic compound. This is not a collection of isolated events, but a single, unbroken chain of innovation spanning thousands of years. The celestial calendar at Nabta Playa, the fortified towns of the Naqada culture, the sprawling Mastaba tombs, and the vast royal enclosures at Abydos are not separate curiosities. They are sequential chapters in the same epic, each one building upon the last. The Great Pyramid did not materialize from a void. It was the magnificent, logical endpoint of this long, daring prelude. It stands upon a foundation not of stone, but of accumulated knowledge, of social experiments in cooperation, and of a spiritual ideology that grew ever more ambitious over countless generations. This grand narrative of slow-burning development was perfectly captured by the Egyptologist John Romer, who wrote, "The origins of Egypt are not to be found in a single event, but in the long and complex processes of its prehistory." That is the ultimate takeaway. The age of the Pharaohs, with all its glittering glory, was not a sudden miracle. It was the brilliant, hard-earned result of a long and fascinating human journey, a process of trial and error that transformed small communities into a civilization capable of building for eternity. We invite you to look at ancient Egypt with this new perspective. See the pyramids not as a beginning, but as a magnificent finale to a story that began much earlier. Which part of this deep prehistory resonates most with you? Was it the cosmic ambition of the Nabta Playa herders, the fierce competition of the first towns, or the ideological leap of the first massive tombs? Let us know which pre-dynastic mystery captures your imagination in the comments below.